There are moments in life when destiny knocks at your door disguised as a storm. I had always known this, but I never imagined it would come in the form of a soaked man holding a worn leather suitcase and asking for shelter on a March night in Nashville. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I heard the knocks on the door. Outside, the rain lashed at the windows of our small rented house in Germantown with a fury I hadn't seen in years. My son Tyler was asleep on the sofa, still clutching the stuffed bear that had been his only constant since we left my mother's house 6 months ago. Who could it be at this hour? I murmured, adjusting my robe and peeking through the curtain. The streetlight faintly illuminated the silhouette of a tall man, gray hair sticking to his forehead from the rain. I hesitated. A single mother in Nashville quickly learns to be cautious, especially when living on a street where neighbors barely know each other, and where the sound of trains on the railroad drowns out any cry for help. But there was something in the man's posture, the way he kept his shoulders hunched against the storm, that awakened in me that maternal instinct that had always been both my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. I opened the door, leaving the security chain in place. "Good evening, ma'am." His voice was deep, tired, with a soft southern accent that reminded me of my grandfather. "I apologize for bothering you so late. My car broke down there at the corner and—" He vaguely gestured behind him, where I could see the flashing emergency lights through the curtain of rain. "All the motels in the area are full because of the music festival. Would you have a phone I could use?" I looked at him more closely. He must have been in his 50s, maybe 60s. He wore a brown leather jacket over a flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He didn't look threatening, just lost, like I felt most days. "Sure," I replied, removing the chain. "Come in, for God's sake. You'll catch pneumonia out there." He entered slowly, as if he didn't want to impose. Drops of rain dripped from his jacket, forming little puddles on the laminate floor that I had just waxed the week before, in a desperate attempt to give some dignity to a house that would never truly be ours. "Thank you very much. I'm James Mitchell." He extended his hand, and I noticed the calluses of someone who works with their hands. "And you are?" Sarah Collins." I shook his hand, feeling the coldness of the rain still clinging to his skin. "And that's Tyler." I pointed to my son, who was still deeply asleep on the sofa. James smiled, and for the first time since I opened the door he seemed to relax. "Lovely child. How old is he?" 3 years old. I replied automatically, but there was something in his gaze that made me hesitate. It wasn't malicious, but there was an intensity there that I couldn't decipher. "The phone is in the kitchen. But I doubt you'll find anyone to come pick you up with this storm." He nodded, following me through the small living room that served as our entire world. I had tried to make it cozy with the few things I brought from my mother's house. The guitar my father gave me before he died, some framed photos, and the blanket my grandmother knitted years ago. But still, it was impossible to hide the fact that we were living with the bare minimum. In the kitchen, James picked up the phone and dialed a few numbers. I pretended to be busy making tea, but I couldn't help but overhear his conversation. "Yes, it's James. No, I'm still in Nashville. The car broke down." There was a long pause. "I know you said not to call again, but this is an emergency, right? I understand. No, I won't bother you again." He hung up more forcefully than necessary, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. I was familiar with that body language. It was the same I carried when talking to my own family. "Complicated?" I asked softly, pouring 2 cups of tea. "You could say that." He accepted the cup with a sad smile. "My daughter. Well, let's just say we're not talking right now." I knew how that felt. My own family had completely cut me off after I got pregnant with Tyler out of wedlock. My mother, a very religious woman, told me I had brought shame to the family name, and that I would only be welcome back once I fixed my life. For 2.5 years I tried to do just that. I lived in her guest room, working 2 jobs to pay my part of the expenses while she took care of Tyler. I accepted all the criticisms, all the comments about how I should find a decent husband, and stop living like a tramp. I swallowed my pride when she said my dream of singing again was girl nonsense, and that I needed to grow up and take responsibility. The last straw came when she threatened to call social services, claiming I was an unfit mother because I worked late to pay the bills. That night I packed up our few belongings and left, promising myself I would never again live under a roof of someone who didn't respect me. Families can be complicated, I murmured, more to myself than to him. That's right. James took a sip of his tea and looked out the window, where the storm continued to rage. This is a lovely house, by the way. Have you lived here long? 6 months, I replied, feeling the familiar weight of uncertainty in my chest. I'm renting, but... I stopped. Why was I telling this to a stranger? But, he gently encouraged, the landlord is thinking of selling. We got a notice last month. The words came out before I could stop them. He wants the tenants out by the end of April to facilitate the sale. James frowned. That's awful. Especially with a small child. Yeah, well, I shrugged, trying to seem stronger than I felt. Life goes on, right? We always make it work. There was something in his look that made me feel like he truly understood. It wasn't pity, I hated pity. It was more like recognition. Like he also knew what it was to start over from scratch. You know, he said slowly, I work in construction. If you need help with some small repairs before looking for a new place, or even to impress the new owner, I'd be happy to help. As a thank you for your hospitality. That's very kind, I replied, genuinely touched. But I can't accept. We barely know each other. Sometimes strangers are kinder than family, he said, and there was a deep sadness in his words that echoed in my own wounded soul. Outside, a particularly loud thunderclap made Tyler stir on the sofa. We both looked at him and James smiled again. He looks like a smart boy. He is. Very smart. My voice carried all the maternal pride I felt. Tyler was the only good thing that had come out of all the mistakes in my life. He loves music. Whenever I play the guitar, he tries to sing along. You play. James's eyes lit up with genuine interest. I used to, I corrected quickly. I mean, I still can, but it's not a priority anymore. Music never stops being a priority, he said with a conviction that surprised me. It just waits for you to be ready to return. There was something in his voice that made me think he knew exactly what he was talking about. But before I could ask, another thunderclap echoed, followed by the sound of something breaking outside. Jesus, James murmured, looking out the window. I think a branch fell on my truck. He stood up to investigate, and I followed him to the door. Outside, we could see that a large tree had fallen, completely blocking the garage entrance and partially crushing the back of his old Ford pickup. Well, he said with a resigned sigh, looks like I'm not going anywhere tonight. It was at that moment that I made a decision that would completely change the course of my life. Looking at that man lost in the storm, I saw a reflection of myself. Someone trying to start over. Someone rejected by their own family. Someone who needed a little human kindness. You can sleep on the couch, I heard myself say. Tyler and I share the room anyway. It's no problem. James looked at me with an expression that mixed gratitude and something else I couldn't identify. Are you sure? I don't want to cause trouble. Trouble would be letting you sleep in the rain, I replied firmly. Besides, after this storm, it will take at least until tomorrow afternoon to get this tree out of here. Thank you so much, Sarah. This means more than you can imagine. As I gathered pillows and blankets for him, I couldn't help but think there was something more to this situation than met the eye. Maybe it was just the exhaustion from the constant struggle to keep our heads above water. But I felt as if the universe had sent James Mitchell to our door for some specific reason. If I had known then what I would discover in the coming days, maybe I would have closed the door and let the storm carry him away. Or maybe not. Maybe deep down I was too tired of fighting alone to refuse any kind of help, even if it came from a stranger with secrets I didn't yet know. As James settled on the couch and I carried Tyler asleep to our room, one last thing caught my attention. On the kitchen table, where he had placed his wallet while drinking his tea, I could see the edge of a business card. The letters were too small to read from a distance, but something about them seemed familiar. I shook my head, reprimanding myself for being paranoid. It was just a man who needed help on a stormy night. Nothing more, nothing less. How wrong I was. I woke up to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, something that hadn't happened in our house for months. For a confused moment, still half asleep, I thought I was dreaming. Then I remembered James. I got up slowly, trying not to wake Tyler, who was fast asleep next to me, with his arm thrown over the teddy bear. Through the bedroom window, I could see that the storm had passed, leaving only puddles of water and the fallen tree blocking our entrance. In the living room, I found the couch neatly arranged with the blankets folded perfectly over the arm. The delicious smell was coming from the kitchen, where James was standing in front of the stove, stirring eggs in a frying pan I didn't even know still worked properly. "Good morning," he said, turning around with a smile. There was something different about him today, less lost, more at home. "I hope you don't mind. I found some ingredients in the fridge, and thought I'd return the hospitality." "Of course I don't mind," I replied, still a bit dazed. It had been so long since someone cooked for me that I had forgotten how nice it was. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "Besides, I discovered I'm a terrible guest when I don't have something to do with my hands." I watched him as he worked. There was a familiarity in his movements, as if cooking came naturally to him. His hands, which I had noticed last night were calloused, moved with precision, and I realized he had used spices I didn't even know we had. "Do you cook professionally?" I asked, curious. "Not exactly." He laughed, a rich sound that filled the small kitchen. "But when you live alone long enough, you learn that surviving on frozen food alone isn't living." There was a subtle melancholy in his words that reminded me of the conversation the night before about his daughter. I wanted to ask more, but Tyler chose that moment to appear in the kitchen, still in his pajamas and with his hair all over the place. "Mom, who's this man?" he asked with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old. "This is James, sweetie. Remember I told you last night that he was going to sleep on the couch because it was raining so much?" Tyler studied James with the seriousness of a little judge. "Did you make breakfast?" "I did, little man." James crouched down to meet Tyler's eyes. "Do you like scrambled eggs?" "I like." "Mommy always burns the eggs," Tyler announced with the devastating honesty of children. "Tyler!" I exclaimed, mortified, but James just laughed. "Well, then it's good I came to visit, isn't it?" he said, winking at Tyler. "How about you help me set the table?" As I watched James teach Tyler to fold napkins like a fancy restaurant, I felt something stir in my chest, a mixture of gratitude and something more dangerous I didn't want to name. It had been so long since Tyler had a male figure around, someone who didn't treat him as a burden or an inconvenient responsibility. During breakfast, James asked questions about Nashville, about our neighborhood, about the places we like to visit. I talked about the park where I took Tyler on weekends, the library where we spent rainy afternoons, the farmer's market downtown where we sometimes got cheaper fruit at the end of the day. "And you?" I asked as he poured more coffee. "Are you from Nashville?" "I was born here, but I lived away for a long time." He hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "I recently came back to take care of some business." There was something in the way he said business that made me think it wasn't just work. But before I could probe further, Tyler asked if James wanted to see his toys, and the moment passed. After breakfast, James insisted on doing the dishes while I got dressed for work. I had managed to get a part-time job at a music store downtown. It wasn't much, but at least it kept me connected to music in some way. "Do you work on Saturdays?" James asked when I explained I needed to leave. "On Saturdays the store gets busier because of the tourists," I replied, looking for a clean shirt. "I usually take Tyler with me. The owner doesn't mind, and he loves being among the guitars." "What kind of store?" "Musical instruments. Morrison's Music, near Broadway." Something passed through James's eyes when I mentioned the name, but it was so quick I thought I imagined it. "It's not a big deal, but it helps me pay the bills." "And do you work with music?" There was genuine interest in his voice. "I sell instruments to tourists who want to take a souvenir from Nashville," I replied with more bitterness than I intended. "Most don't even know how to tune a guitar." "But you do." It wasn't a question. I looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "Yes, I do. I've played since I was 10. My father." I stopped, feeling the familiar pang of longing. "My father was a musician. He taught me." "And do you still play?" I pointed to the guitar in the living room, dusted in a corner. "Sometimes. When Tyler is asleep and I'm not too exhausted." "Have you ever thought about playing professionally again?" The question hit me like a slap. With a 3-year-old and rent to pay? It's not very practical. Music isn't about practicality, he said gently. It's about need. And you look like someone who needs music like air to breathe. His words touched something deep, something I had buried beneath piles of bills and responsibilities. For a moment I allowed myself to remember what it was like to step on stage at the Bluebird Cafe. What it was like to feel the music flow through me like water. What it was like to believe I could actually do something with my life beyond surviving. Maybe, I murmured, grabbing my bag. But first I need to keep a roof over our heads. James nodded, but I could see he wanted to say more. The tree will probably be removed by the time you get back. Can I stay with Tyler while that happens? I promise he'll be safe. I hesitated. It was a tempting offer. Babysitters cost money I didn't have, and Tyler seemed to have warmed up to James instantly. But it was risky to leave my son with a stranger, even one who had been kind to us. Please, James added, seeing my hesitation. I know you hardly know me, but I have experience with kids, and it would be nice to have company. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that mirrored my own, that made me decide to trust him. Okay, I finally said. But if he causes any trouble? He won't, James assured. We'll have fun, won't we, Tyler? My son eagerly nodded, already planning all the things he wanted to show his new friend. As I drove to work in my old Honda Civic, which made concerning noises, I couldn't stop thinking about James. There was something familiar about him, something I couldn't identify. The way he talked about music, as if he truly understood its importance. The sadness in his eyes when he mentioned his daughter. The ease with which Tyler had opened up to him. And there was another thing. The way he had looked at our house, not with pity or disdain, but as if he were assessing something. I shook my head, reprimanding myself for being paranoid again. At Morrison's Music, the day passed slowly. I sold 2 harmonicas to Japanese tourists, a custom pick to a local teenager, and spent most of the time organizing stock and cleaning instruments. My boss, Mr. Morrison, was a kind man in his 70s who let me play the guitars when there were no customers. You know, you could make more playing in the bars on Broadway than selling instruments here, he said, as he did at least once a week. And who would take care of Tyler? I replied automatically. There are daycares, Sarah. And there are ways to make both things work. I knew he was right, but admitting that would mean admitting I had given up on my dreams out of fear rather than practical need. It was easier to blame the circumstances. When I came home in the late afternoon, I found James and Tyler in the backyard, examining the abandoned garden that came with the house. Tyler was holding a small gardening trowel, covered in dirt and radiating happiness. Mom, James said we can plant tomatoes. Tyler ran to me, leaving muddy tracks behind. I hope you don't mind, James said, standing up and wiping his hands on his pants. He saw some old seeds in the garage and got curious about how plants grow. Of course I don't mind. And I really didn't. It had been months since Tyler had seemed so excited about something. How was your day? We built a fort with the sofa cushions, Tyler announced proudly. And James taught me how to whistle. Look. Tyler tried to whistle, producing only air. But his expression of pure concentration was adorable. We're still working on the technique, James said with a smile. But he's almost got it. As Tyler kept practicing, James and I sat on the back porch steps. The afternoon was calm with that special golden light Nashville has at the end of the day, and for the first time in months I felt peaceful, like I could breathe fully. Thank you, I said to James, for taking care of him today. I know it's not your responsibility. It was a pleasure, he replied, and I could see he was sincere. He's a special kid, Sarah. You're doing a good job. His words hit a wounded place inside me. No one had told me that in a long time. I don't always feel that way, I admitted. Sometimes I feel like I'm just winging it, hoping I don't mess everything up. Every parent feels that way, James said gently. The difference is in caring enough to worry. There was something in his voice that made me think he spoke from experience. Do you have kids? His face closed slightly. I did. A daughter. But He stopped looking at his hands. I made mistakes. Big mistakes. And now she doesn't want to talk to me. I'm sorry. I am too. He fell silent for a moment. It's funny how we think we have all the time in the world to fix things, And then suddenly we realize we don't. We sat in comfortable silence, watching Tyler play in the dirt. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange that made Nashville look like a painting. "Sarah," James said finally, "can I ask you a personal question?" My stomach contracted slightly, but I nodded. "Why did you really stop playing? And don't tell me it's just because of Tyler. There's something else." The question cut deeper than I expected. For a long moment I considered telling a half-truth, as I always did. But there was something in James and understanding that made me want to be honest. "Because I failed," I finally said. "I had it all, a contract with an independent label, shows booked, even some songs on the local radio. And then I took a deep breath. Then I screwed it all up. I got pregnant by a man who didn't love me, my family rejected me, and the label canceled my contract because I wasn't the image they wanted anymore." "And you believed them?" "I believed maybe they were right. That I was just a naive girl who thought I could conquer Nashville with a few pretty songs and a lot of heart." James looked at me for a long moment. "Do you know the difference between a real musician and someone who's just pretending to be one?" I shook my head. "A real musician can't stop making music, even when everything goes wrong. Even when the world says they're not good enough. Music finds a way out, even if it's just singing to a 3-year-old in the kitchen at 2 in the morning." His words hit me in the chest like a direct arrow. How did he know about the nights I sang softly to Tyler when he couldn't sleep? How did he know that I still composed melodies in my head while I worked? "How do you know so much about music?" I asked. For a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Let's just say I've been in the business. A long time ago." Before I could ask more, Tyler came running to us, holding something in his dirty hands. "Look, I found this in the dirt." He opened his palms to reveal a small metal coin green with rust. James took the coin and examined it carefully. His expression changed subtly, as if he recognized something. "It's very old," he said, handing it back to Tyler. "Probably from when this house was built." "Can I keep it?" Tyler asked, already holding the coin like it was a treasure. "Of course you can, sweetheart," I replied. "But first let's clean you up. Looks like you rolled in the dirt." While I was bathing Tyler, I couldn't stop thinking about James's reaction to the coin. There was something there, something he had recognized. And the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that there was a lot more to James Mitchell than he was letting on. That night, after Tyler had fallen asleep, I found James in the living room, staring out the window at the dark street. There was a thoughtful quality to him, almost melancholic. "Penny for your thoughts?" I said, using the expression my father always used. He smiled sadly. "I was thinking about how strange it is how life takes us down paths we never expected. A year ago, if someone had told me I'd be here in this house with you." He shook his head. "I never would have believed it." "And where did you think you'd be?" "Probably drinking alone in some downtown bar, feeling sorry for myself." The raw honesty of his response surprised me. "It's been a tough year. For none of us," I murmured. We sat in silence for a moment, two castaways sharing a wreck. Then James turned to me. "Sarah, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course." "Could you play something? Just one song. It's been so long since I've heard real music." I hesitated. I hadn't played for anyone in over a year. But there was something in the way he asked, a vulnerability that echoed my own need. I went to the guitar and picked it up, feeling the familiar weight in my hands. Tuning it took a few minutes. The strings were loose from disuse. Then, without thinking too much about it, I started to play. The song that came out was one I had written years ago, about second chances and new beginnings. My voice was raspy at first, but soon it found its rhythm. I sang about storms passing, about finding hope in the most unexpected places, about the courage needed to try again. When I finished, I looked at James and was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "That song," he said in a choked voice. "Is it yours?" I nodded, suddenly embarrassed. "I wrote it a few years ago. It's nothing special." "It is," he interrupted me. "It's extraordinary. Sarah, you have a gift. A real gift." The intensity in his voice made me pull back slightly. "James, No," he said, standing up abruptly. "Sorry. I shouldn't have." He ran his hands through his hair, looking agitated. "It's late. We should sleep. I watched him settle on the couch, confused by the sudden shift in his mood. There was something happening here, something I didn't understand. But when I tried to probe further, he had already turned to the wall, pretending to sleep. Lying in bed that night with Tyler asleep beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about James's reaction to my music. There was something familiar in the way he had responded, as if he understood not just the music but what it meant. And there was another detail that troubled me. When he had commented about the coin being from when the house was built, how did he know when our house had been built? I didn't even know that information myself. For the first time since I had found him in the storm, I started to seriously wonder. Who was James Mitchell, and what was he really doing here? On Sunday morning, I woke up to the sound of James talking on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, but there was an urgency in it that made me stay alert. Yes, I understand the implications. No, I haven't spoken to her about it yet. I know the deadline is approaching, but this isn't the right time. I stayed still in bed trying to listen more, but Tyler chose that moment to wake up, stretching and making those adorable sleepy noises that always melted my heart. "Good morning, my love," I murmured, kissing his forehead. "How about we have breakfast?" When we arrived in the kitchen, James had already hung up the phone and was making pancakes. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there the night before. "Everything okay?" I asked, picking Tyler up to wash him in the sink. "Sure," he replied too quickly. "Just some work-related matters." "Work? I thought you said you were in construction." There was an almost imperceptible pause before he answered. "Yes, but I also handle some properties. Nothing too interesting." Properties. The word echoed in my mind. James poured the batter into the frying pan with more force than necessary, and I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "James!" Tyler jumped from my arms and ran over to him. "Can I help with the pancakes?" The tension in James's face dissolved instantly when he looked at my son. "Of course, buddy. How about you stir this bowl for me?" As they cooked together, I watched James carefully. There was something different about him today. A restlessness that contrasted with the calm he had shown the past 2 days. And that phone conversation. What deadline was he talking about? After breakfast, James offered to take Tyler to the park while I did some housework. Normally, I would have declined. He was still a stranger after all, but Tyler was so excited about the idea that I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Are you sure you don't mind?" I asked for the third time while tying Tyler's shoes. "I'm absolutely sure," James replied, but there was something forced in his smile. "Besides, I need some fresh air." And Tyler promised to show me how the slide works at Centennial Park. "It's the tallest slide in Nashville," Tyler proudly announced, taking James's hand. Watching them leave together, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Tyler hadn't attached himself to anyone like this since we left my mother's house. Seeing my son happy was wonderful, but also terrifying. What if James disappeared from our lives as suddenly as he had appeared? With the house quiet for the first time in days, I decided to take advantage and organize some papers. That's when I found the letter that had arrived on Friday, and that I had forgotten to open in the rush of work. The envelope had the letterhead of a local law firm. My stomach tightened. Letters from lawyers never brought good news for people like me. I opened it with trembling hands and read, "Dear Mrs. Collins, we are writing on behalf of our client to inform you that the property located at 1247 Shelby Avenue has been sold. The new owner has requested that all tenants vacate the property by April 30th, 2024, to allow for extensive renovations before the property is placed back on the market. We understand that this may cause inconvenience, but the new owner is willing to assist with moving costs for tenants who comply with the established deadline. For more information, please contact our office." April 30th. That gave me less than 6 weeks to find a new place to live. In Nashville, with the housing market inflated by tourists and the music industry, it would be nearly impossible to find something I could afford. I sat heavily at the kitchen table, feeling the familiar weight of despair settle in my chest. Every time it seemed like things were stabilizing, something happened to remind me how precarious our situation was. The phone rang, making me jump. It was my supervisor from the music store. "Sarah? I'm sorry to bother you on Sunday, but we've had a problem. Mr. Morrison had to be hospitalized last night, heart problems." We'll have to close the store for a few days, maybe more. My world collapsed a little more. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say yes, but he's going to need some rest for a few weeks. I'll call you as soon as we know more about when we can reopen. I hung up the phone and put my head in my hands. No job and only 6 weeks to find a new home. Our situation had gone from difficult to desperate in a matter of minutes. That's how James and Tyler found me when they came back from the park. Mom! Tyler ran to me, radiant. I went down the slide by myself. And James said I'm very brave. I forced a smile, trying to hide my despair. That's wonderful, sweetie. You had so much fun. But James knew me well enough now to see that something was wrong. Sarah? What happened? I showed him the letter without saying anything. I watched as he read it, noticing how his expression changed subtly. It wasn't surprise, it was something more complicated, like guilt? 6 weeks, I murmured. And now the store is going to be closed indefinitely because Mr. Morrison's in the hospital. Hospital? Tyler looked back and forth between us. Is Mr. Morrison sick? He'll be okay, sweetie, I reassured, picking him up. He just needs to rest for a bit. James was rereading the letter, and I could see his mind working quickly. Sarah, about this property. Do you know who the new owner is? No. The letter doesn't mention who it is. I looked at him curiously. Why? Sometimes these investors are more flexible than they seem. Maybe it's worth trying to talk to him directly. There was something in the way he said that made me frown. Do you know a lot of real estate investors? Some, he replied vaguely. Nashville is a small town when it comes to business. James, what exactly do you do when you're not fixing things? For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me the truth. There was a visible struggle in his eyes, like he was weighing his options. Then Tyler interrupted the moment. Can I turn on the TV? I want to watch cartoons. Sure, sweetie, I replied, putting him down on the floor. When Tyler ran to the living room, James turned to me with a serious expression. Sarah, I want to help you with this. You've already helped more than enough. It's not your responsibility. What if it was? His words came so quickly it seemed he hadn't planned to say them. What do you mean? James ran his hands through his hair, looking agitated. I mean, what if I could talk to the new owner? Maybe negotiate more time for you. Why would you do that? And more importantly, how could you do that? He didn't answer immediately, and in the silence that followed, I started to put the pieces together. His reaction to the letter. His knowledge of properties. The phone conversation this morning about deadlines and implications. James, I said slowly, you know who the new owner of this house is, don't you? His expression confirmed my suspicions before he even opened his mouth. Sarah, I can explain. Then explain. My voice was dangerously calm. Explain how a man who appeared on my doorstep in a random storm suddenly can negotiate with the investor who bought my house. It's not what you think. And what am I thinking, James? Because honestly, I don't know what to think about you anymore. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle in his eyes. Then, to my surprise, he sighed heavily and sat down in the chair next to me. You're right. I know the new owner. Very well, actually. Who is he? Sarah. Who is he, James? Another long pause. Then, it's me. The words hung in the air between us like an explosive confession. For a moment I couldn't process what he had said. I bought this property 3 months ago, along with 5 others in the area. His voice was low, laden with guilt. It's what I do. I buy old properties, renovate them and sell them. The reality hit me like a punch to the stomach. You're my landlord. Sarah, please let me explain. I stood up abruptly, feeling a rage burning in my chest like I hadn't felt in years. Explain what? How you've lied to me from the very first moment. How you came into my house pretending to be a lost stranger when you were really here to what? See if I was a problematic tenant. No. James stood up too, his hands outstretched in a plea. It wasn't like that. My car really broke down, I was really lost. But you knew. You knew this was your property when you knocked on my door. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. My God, I murmured, feeling a mixture of betrayal and humiliation burning in my throat. You must have found it all so amusing. The poor single mom offering shelter to the man who's about to evict her. Sarah, no. And last night when I played for you, when I opened my heart. My voice faltered as I remembered how vulnerable I had been. You must have laughed inside. Never. The force of his response made me stop. Sarah, what happened last night? Your music was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. And it has nothing to do with properties or business. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? James ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking much older than his 50-something years. Because when I came into this house, when I met you and Tyler, for the first time in months, I felt like a human being again, not just a lonely businessman making money off properties. And that gave you the right to lie? No, he admitted. It didn't. But I didn't want it to end. You two were the first good thing that happened in my life in a long time. From the living room, we heard Tyler laughing at something on TV, unaware of the drama unfolding in the kitchen. The sound reminded me of how my son had attached himself to James, how he had blossomed with the male attention. Leave, I said quietly. Sarah. Leave my house. My voice was louder now, heavy with all the pain and anger I had swallowed over the years. Leave your house. Go and let me figure out how to explain to my 3-year-old why another man he learned to trust just disappeared. Please, let me explain everything. There's nothing to explain. I exploded. You lied. From the very first moment you lied. I trusted you with my son. I started to trust you with my feelings, and it was all based on a lie. Tyler appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, startled by the shouting. Mom? Why are you yelling? The innocent question from my son completely broke me. I knelt next to him, trying to control my voice. James needs to leave now, sweetheart. But why? Doesn't he like us anymore? The tears burned in my eyes. How would I explain this without destroying the trust Tyler had started to build? It's not that, little man, James said gently, kneeling to meet Tyler's eyes. I like you both very much. But sometimes adults make mistakes, and I made a really big one. What kind of mistake? James glanced at me briefly before answering. I didn't tell your mom the truth about some important things. And when we don't tell the truth to the people we love, we hurt them a lot. Can you say sorry? Tyler suggested with the devastating simplicity of a child. I can. And I am. James looked directly at me. But sometimes apologies aren't enough to fix what we've broken. Tyler looked between us, clearly confused but starting to understand that something serious was happening. Are you coming back? He asked James in a small voice. The question hung in the air for an eternal moment. James looked at me, and I saw all the pain and regret in the world in his eyes. I don't know, Tyler. That depends on your mom. But I had already made my decision. I stood up and picked Tyler up in my arms. Say goodbye to James, love. He needs to leave now. Tyler waved sadly, and James slowly got up. For a moment I thought he was going to say something more, make one last plea. Instead he just nodded. My things are still in the living room. I'll put them on the porch, I replied coldly. James walked to the door, stopping only to look back once. Sarah, the deadline from the letter. You can stay here as long as you need. I won't force you to leave. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's trying to do the right thing. If you wanted to do the right thing, you would have been honest from the start. He nodded sadly and left through the front door. I heard the sound of his footsteps on the wooden porch, then the creak of the gate closing. Tyler started crying softly, and I hugged him tighter, my own tears finally falling. Why did James leave, Mom? Because sometimes people aren't who we think they are. I murmured against his soft hair. But even as I said that, part of me wondered if I had overreacted. There was something in the pain in James's eyes that seemed genuine. And his offer to let us stay. No. I shook my head firmly. I had spent too many years accepting crumbs from people who had power over me. James Mitchell may have come like a stranger in the storm, but he turned out to be just another man who had lied to get what he wanted. What I didn't understand was what exactly he had wanted, and why, when he got it, he seemed more miserable than I did. That night, after putting Tyler to bed, a long and difficult process since he kept asking when James would come back, I sat alone in the silent room. The house felt smaller without his presence, emptier. I picked up the guitar for the first time without being asked and started to play, letting the music express all the confusion and pain I couldn't put into words. I sang about broken trust and shattered dreams, about the difficulty of knowing who to believe when you've been disappointed so many times. It was only when I finished that I realized someone was standing outside the living room window, a familiar silhouette in the dark. James was there, standing on the sidewalk as if he couldn't force himself to leave completely. For a moment our eyes met through the glass. Even in the dark I could see the pain in his eyes, a pain that mirrored my own. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night of Nashville. And I was left alone again, wondering if I had done the right thing, or if I had just pushed away the only person who had truly tried to understand me. The week that followed was one of the hardest I've faced since Tyler was born. Not only because of the desperate financial situation, though that alone was enough to keep me up at night, but because of how my son reacted to James's sudden absence. "Where's James?" became Tyler's constant question. During breakfast he didn't make. During our walk to the library, when we passed by the park where they had played. At night, when Tyler would look expectantly at the door, hoping to hear the familiar knocks. "He had to travel, sweetie," I lied, hating myself for each word. "Remember he said he had business to take care of? But he said he was coming back. He said he was coming back." The words echoed in my mind like an accusation, because James had truly said that implicitly, with his kind actions and genuine care. And I was the one who decided he wouldn't come back. On Tuesday I found out things could get even worse. Mr. Morrison personally called me with the news. The doctors had found more problems during the tests, and he would need to undergo heart surgery. The store would be closed for at least 2 months. "Sarah, dear." His trembling voice on the phone broke my heart. "I wish I could keep you on payroll, but with the store closed." "Don't worry about me, Mr. Morrison," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You just focus on getting better." But when I hung up the phone, reality hit me like an avalanche. No job, only a few $100s in the account, and 6 weeks to find a new place in Nashville, a city where one-bedroom apartments cost more than I made in a month. It was in this growing despair that I found the envelope slipped under my door on Thursday morning. Inside was a handwritten letter in careful, masculine handwriting. "Sarah, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I completely understand why. But there are things I need to tell you, things that might explain why I acted the way I did. My full name is James Robert Mitchell. I'm 54 years old and have been a widower for 3 years. My wife, Margaret, died of cancer after a long battle, and our daughter Emma blames me for not being present enough during her illness. Emma is right. I was so focused on working, on making money to pay for the treatments, that I lost the last precious months I could have spent with my wife. When Margaret died, Emma told me I had chosen money over family, and since then she refuses to speak to me. I moved to Nashville a year ago, trying to start over. I started investing in properties as a way to keep busy, to have something to do besides feeling sorry for myself. But the work became an obsession, the only thing that kept me from thinking about the loneliness. When I bought your house, it was just another property on a spreadsheet. I didn't even know there were tenants living there until my lawyer prepared the eviction papers. I planned to come check on the property before starting the renovations. My car really did break down that night. The storm was real. But when I knocked on your door and you let me in when I met you and Tyler, for the first time in years I felt like I belonged somewhere. I should have told you the truth right away. But every hour that passed, every meal we shared, every smile from Tyler, made me want to delay the inevitable moment when you would find out who I really was and hate me for it. I'm not trying to make excuses. There is no excuse for what I did. But I want you to know that the last few days I spent with you were the first in 3 years that I felt truly alive. I won't bother you anymore. But please, know that you and Tyler can stay in the house for as long as you need. No rent, no pressure. It's the least I can do. And Sarah, your music. Never stop playing. The world needs to hear your voice. With all my regret, James, I've attached some contacts that might be useful. I know people in the Nashville music industry. If you want, I can make some introductions. No strings attached, no favors expected in return. Just because your talent deserves to be recognized. My hand shook as I finished reading. Along with the letter was a list of contacts, producers, independent label owners, managers of famous nightclubs. Names I recognized from my days trying to break into the music industry. And at the end of the list, a handwritten note. I mentioned your name to Jack Sullivan from Red River Records. He's interested in hearing your music. His number is up top. Jack Sullivan. The Jack Sullivan, who had discovered some of the biggest country talents of the last decade. The man I had tried to contact dozens of times years ago, always receiving the standard response of, "We're not accepting submissions at this time." I sat heavily at the kitchen table, rereading the letter. Each word seemed sincere, laden with a pain I recognized intimately. The story about his wife, about his daughter. It explained so much about the lost man who had appeared on my doorstep. "Mom!" Tyler appeared in the kitchen, still in his pajamas. "Are you crying?" I quickly wiped my eyes. "No, sweetie. Just, something got in my eye." He came over and climbed onto my lap, his small warm weight instantly calming me. "Do you miss James?" The direct question from my son hit me like a punch. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you've been sad since he left. And I'm sad too." I looked at Tyler's serious face, his big, honest eyes, and realized I couldn't lie anymore. Not to him, not to myself. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "I miss him." "Then why can't he come back?" How could I explain to a 3-year-old the complexities of betrayed trust, of wounded pride, of the need for emotional protection? How could I say that sometimes missing someone isn't enough to overcome the hurt? "It's complicated, Tyler. You could call him. Like we call Grandma." The innocent comparison made me laugh despite the sadness. My mom and I had a relationship as complicated as James's with his daughter, apparently. "Maybe," I murmured, kissing Tyler's forehead. That afternoon, after taking Tyler to the library for story time, I couldn't delay the inevitable anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed Jack Sullivan's number. "Red River Records, Jack speaking." The voice was exactly as I remembered from the few seconds we'd talked years ago. Direct, no time for pleasantries. "Mr. Sullivan? My name is Sarah Collins. I understand James Mitchell spoke with you about my music." There was a pause then. "Ah, yes. Sarah Collins. James sent me some recordings of yours by email. Impressive music. Do you have time to come to the studio tomorrow?" My heart stopped. He sent recordings? He said he recorded you playing at his house a few days ago. Cell phone audio, nothing professional, but my God, what a voice. And that song about storms and new beginnings? Pure poetry. James had recorded our impromptu music session. And instead of using it against me in some way, he had helped me. "Sarah? Are you still there?" "Yes, sorry. Yes, I can come tomorrow." "What time?" 2 in the afternoon. "And bring your guitar." When I hung up, I was trembling. For years, I had dreamed of an opportunity like this. And now that it was here, all I could think about was the man who had made it possible. The same man I had expelled from my house with bitter words. That night, after putting Tyler to bed, I sat on the back porch with the guitar in my lap. The moon was full, casting light on the small garden where James and Tyler had planted seeds just a week ago. Small green sprouts were already starting to appear in the dark soil. I began to play, softly so as not to wake Tyler. The music that came out was different from anything I had written before. It was about regret and forgiveness, about second chances and the courage to admit when we're wrong. I sang about a man lost in a storm, about a woman who had forgotten how to trust, about a child who saw kindness where adults saw only complications. I sang about how hard it is to distinguish between protection and self-defense, between justified caution and blind pride. When I finished, there were tears in my eyes. For the first time since the confrontation in the kitchen, I allowed myself to really think about James. Not as the landlord who had lied, but as the man who had cried when he heard my music, who had taught my son to plant seeds, who had cooked for us as if we were a family. I picked up my phone and before I could change my mind, typed a message. "James, I received your letter. And the call from Jack Sullivan. I don't know what to say except, thank you. I need to talk to you. There are things I need to say too. Sarah." I sent it before I could lose the courage. The response came in less than 5 minutes. "Sarah, I'm staying at the Hermitage Hotel. Room 314. I can come to you? Or would you prefer to meet somewhere neutral? Just let me know when and where. James. I stared at the message for a long moment. The Hermitage Hotel was one of the most expensive in Nashville. Of course that's where he was staying. The man owned properties all over the city. But there was something in the way he had responded, the instant willingness to meet on my terms, that reminded me of why I had started to trust him in the first place. Here is fine. Tomorrow night after Tyler goes to bed? Around 8. I'll be there. And Sarah. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. I set the phone aside and looked again at the small sprouts in the garden. Maybe James was right about planting seeds. Maybe, even after devastating storms, it was still possible for new things to grow. The next morning, I woke up to Tyler jumping on the bed. Mom! Mom! The tomatoes are growing. We ran to the backyard, where he proudly pointed to the small green sprouts that had appeared overnight. James will be so happy when he sees, Tyler announced. Then, with the eerily sharp perception of children, he looked directly at me. He's going to see, right, Mom? I kneeled beside my son and looked at the little plants that represented so much hope and possibility. Yes, Tyler. I think so. For the first time in a week, my son smiled for real. And for the first time in years, I began to believe that maybe I could learn to trust again. But first, there was a conversation that needed to happen. A conversation that would determine whether these seeds of possibility had a chance to grow, or if they would wither before even blooming. That afternoon, in the Red River Records studio, I played my music for Jack Sullivan with an intensity one hadn't felt in years. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Sarah, he finally said. Where the hell have you been hiding all these years? It was a question I barely knew how to answer. Where had I been? Hiding behind fear, responsibility, the belief that dreams were luxuries people like me couldn't afford to have. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. I've been here, I replied simply, waiting for the storm to pass. Jack smiled. Well, the storm has passed. Are you ready to shine? I looked out the studio window at the busy streets of Nashville, where thousands of people came every day chasing the same dream I had abandoned years ago. Yes, I said, and for the first time in a long time I really believed it. I'm ready. Now I just had to figure out if I was ready for more than just music. If I was ready to forgive, to trust, to give James Mitchell and myself a second chance. At 8 o'clock sharp, I heard the soft knocks at the door, the same hesitant rhythm from a week ago, when James had first appeared drenched from the storm. But this time I knew exactly who was on the other side. Tyler was already asleep, exhausted after a day of excitement over my session at the studio and the tomatoes that are growing really fast. I took a deep breath, nervously smoothing my blouse, and opened the door. James stood on the porch, holding a simple bouquet of daisies, nothing elaborate or expensive, just flowers picked from the field that I recognized as being from the area near the park where he and Tyler had played. He was wearing the same simple clothes as always. Jeans, a flannel shirt, and the leather jacket he wore the night we met. Hi, he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that hadn't been there before. Hi. I accepted the flowers, feeling the weight of the moment. Come in. He hesitated at the threshold, as if asking permission to step into sacred ground. Are you sure? I am. The room felt smaller with him there, but in a different way this time. It wasn't the comfortable, familiar presence of the previous days, but something more laden with unexplored possibilities. We sat at the kitchen table, the same places where we had had tea that first night. James looked around and I could see a sense of nostalgia in his eyes. How's Tyler? He asked. Excited. He's been asking about you every day. I paused. And he was glowing when I told him you'd come back to see the tomatoes. The smile that crossed James's face was both joyful and painful. They've sprouted. This morning. Tyler could hardly contain his excitement. He's a special kid, Sarah. You've raised an incredible boy. Thank you. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what I needed to say. James, about the session at the studio today. How was it? Incredible. Better than I could have dreamed. I looked directly at him. Jack Sullivan wants to offer me a contract. To record an EP initially, maybe a full album if everything goes well. The genuine joy that lit up James's face told me everything I needed to know about his true intentions. Sarah, that's wonderful. I knew that once the right people heard your music. Why did you do it? The question came out more abruptly than I intended. James paused, clearly surprised. Do what? Connect me with Jack Sullivan. Record my music without telling me. Use your influence to get me an audition. I leaned forward. Why did you do that after everything that happened between us? He was silent for a long moment, fidgeting with his hands on the table. Because, he said finally, your music was the most real thing I've heard in years. And because, his voice faltered slightly, because when someone has a gift like yours, and you know you can help, you do it. Even if that person never wants to speak to you again. But why didn't you tell me? Why do it secretly? Because if I had told you, you would have refused. You would have thought it was pity or manipulation, or some sort of payment for guilt. He looked directly at me. And because I wanted it to happen for the right reasons. Your music speaks for itself, Sarah. I just opened a door that should have been opened years ago. The sincerity in his voice disarmed me completely. Throughout the week, I had built walls around my heart, preparing myself for more disappointment. But it was becoming harder and harder to keep those defenses in place. James, I said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. That first night when you knocked on my door, you really didn't know that Tyler and I lived here? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the question physically pained him. I knew there were tenants. My lawyer had mentioned a single mother with a small child when he prepared the eviction papers. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. But you were just statistics to me. Numbers on a spreadsheet. The brutal honesty in his answer hurt, but in a strange way it also relieved me. And when you knocked on the door? When you opened that door, when I saw your face, when Tyler appeared sleeping on the couch. James ran his hands through his hair. Suddenly you became real. You stopped being numbers and became people. A mother trying to raise her child alone. A child who needed stability. And you couldn't tell us the truth. I couldn't. Because for the first time in 3 years I felt useful. Needed. Not just as a businessman or a property owner, but as a human being. His voice grew quieter. And because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would hate me. And I couldn't bear the thought of being hated by anyone else. The last words carried so much weight that I felt my heart tighten. Does your daughter really hate you? James laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. Emma doesn't hate me. She despises me, which is worse. She thinks I'm a selfish man who chose work and money over family. And he swallowed hard. She's not completely wrong. Tell me about Margaret. His wife's name hovered in the air between us like a prayer. James stayed silent for so long that I thought he wouldn't respond. Margaret was pure light, he finally said. A kindergarten teacher, a volunteer at animal shelters, the kind of person who stopped to help strangers on the street. When we found out about the cancer, I panicked. I started working like a madman, taking every project that came my way because I thought if I made enough money, I could pay for the best doctors, the best treatments. But you lost time with her. I did. The last 6 months of her life, when she needed me most, I was on construction sites or in business meetings. And Emma. His voice cracked slightly. Emma had to take care of her alone. At 20, she became a nurse, a caretaker, everything I should have been. And she blames you for that. She should blame me. Because when Margaret died, it was Emma holding her hand, not me. I was in a meeting about a commercial property that couldn't be delayed. The quotation marks in his voice were loaded with self-recrimination. I got to the hospital 20 minutes after she had passed. Tears burned my eyes as I imagined the pain he carried. James. So yes, when Emma told me I was a man who prioritized money over family, she was right. And when she told me she didn't want to speak to me again, until I learned what really matters in life. He looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Until I came here, until I met you, I didn't know she was giving me the chance to learn exactly that. The silence that followed was heavy with raw emotion. Finally, I understood why James had lied, why he had clung so desperately to the simple moments we shared. It wasn't manipulation, it was a broken man trying to figure out how to be human again. That's why you stayed, I murmured. It wasn't about property or business. It was about family. You reminded me of what I had lost. And more than that, you showed me that it was still possible to find it again. He leaned forward. Sarah, I know I lied to you. I know I broke your trust. But I want you to know that every moment I spent with you was real. The way I felt when Tyler showed me his toys, when you played guitar for me, when we cooked together that first morning. That was real. I know, I admitted quietly. Deep down I always knew. So why? Because I was scared too. The words came in a whisper. James, you weren't the only one who's been hurt for trusting the wrong person. My whole life, the people who were supposed to love me used it against me. My family rejected me when I needed them most. Tyler's dad abandoned me as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. I learned that depending on other people is a luxury I can't afford. And I proved you were right by lying from the start. No, I said, surprising both of us. You proved you're as lost as I am. That you make mistakes for the same reasons I do: fear, the need for protection, past experiences that taught us not to trust. James looked at me as if he were seeing something he hadn't expected. Sarah, let me finish. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I would say next would change everything between us. This week has been terrible. Not just because of the financial situation or losing my job. It's been terrible because Tyler asked about you every day, and because I missed you too. Because for the first time in years, I started to imagine what it would be like to not do everything alone. You're not alone. But I am. I always have been. And maybe it's time to stop being so afraid of that changing. I stood up from the table and walked over to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where the little tomato sprouts were growing in the dark. You know what Tyler told me today? He said the tomatoes need both rain and sun to grow. That if they only have sun, they dry up. But if they only have rain, they rot. I turned to look at James. Maybe relationships are like that too. Maybe we need both storms and sunny days to really grow. James stood up as well, walking over to stand by my side at the window. And are you willing to risk another storm? I looked at his reflection in the glass, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the calloused hands that had cooked for us and planted seeds with my son. I am, I said. But this time with conditions. Any condition you want. Total honesty. Even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Total honesty, he agreed. And you need to talk to your daughter. James stepped back slightly. Sarah. No, I insisted. You can't build something new with me and Tyler while carrying that weight. Emma needs to know that you've learned, that you've changed. And you need her in your life. What if she doesn't want to listen to me? Then you try again. And again. Until she understands that you really changed. I gently touched his arm. Because you've changed, James. I can see it. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. About everything. He turned to face me completely. Sarah, I love you. I love you and Tyler in a way I never thought I could love again. And I want to do this right this time. My heart stopped for a moment. James. I know it's too soon to say this. I know we still have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust. But I want you to know where I stand emotionally, so there are no more secrets between us. The tears I had held back all week finally fell. I love you too, I whispered. And that's why it hurt so much when I found out about the lie. Because I was already falling for you. James raised his hands to touch my face, wiping the tears with his thumbs. Can we try again? The right way this time. Yes, I said, covering his hands with mine. But slowly. Step by step. Step by step, he agreed. It was then that we heard a little voice from the hallway. Mom? Why are you crying? We turned to see Tyler standing in the kitchen doorway, holding his teddy bear and with his hair messy from sleep. Hi, little man, James said gently, kneeling to meet Tyler's eyes. Sorry if we woke you. Tyler ran up to him, and my heart warmed as James picked him up as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You're back, Tyler exclaimed. I knew you'd come back to see the tomatoes. I'm back. The smell of ripe tomatoes and fresh basil filled the air as I picked the last fruits from our autumn garden. It was hard to believe that those lush plants had grown from the small sprouts that Tyler and James had planted that March morning, so long ago. Mom, look how many I picked. Tyler ran to me, his small arms loaded with bright red tomatoes. Now 4 years old, he had grown several centimeters and gained a confidence that filled me with pride every day. "Wow, Tyler. You picked the biggest ones," I praised, helping him put the tomatoes in the basket. "James will be impressed when he sees." He said he was bringing Emma today. Tyler practically vibrated with excitement. In the last 2 months, since James and his daughter had finally started rebuilding their relationship, Tyler had adopted Emma as the older sister he had always wanted. The sound of tires on the driveway made me look up. James's familiar Toyota Camry parked next to my Honda Civic, which now worked perfectly after James insisted on paying for the repairs as a reconciliation gift. But it wasn't James who got out of the car first. A young blonde woman, 23 years old, with the same gentle eyes as her father, stepped out of the passenger side carrying a box wrapped in colorful paper. "Emma!" Tyler dropped his basket and ran to her, being lifted into an enthusiastic hug. "Hello, my little farmer." Emma laughed, spinning with Tyler in her arms. "I heard you've got some giant tomatoes to show me." Watching their interaction, my heart warmed. Emma had been cautious at first. Years of hurt don't disappear overnight. But the combination of James's genuine persistence, Tyler's contagious innocence, and my own testimony about her father's transformation had gradually melted the barriers. James got out of the car, and my pulse still quickened when I saw him, even after 6 months together. He wore jeans and a blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and carried his own wrapped box, larger than Emma's. "Hello, beautiful," he said, giving me a kiss that still made me feel like a lovesick teenager. "Hello to you too," I replied, noticing how relaxed and happy he looked. The tension he carried in his shoulders when we first met had completely disappeared. "How was the Birmingham trip?" "Productive. Emma helped me close the sale of the property there." He smiled at his daughter, who was now kneeling in the garden with Tyler, examining the plants. "She's got a knack for business." It was true. Emma had graduated with a business administration degree the previous year and, after months of long and sometimes painful conversations with James, had decided to join his business. Not as an easy way of forgiveness, but as a new beginning where they could work together in a way that honored Margaret's memory. "And the surprise?" I asked, noticing the boxes they both carried. "Oh, that." James smiled mysteriously. "First, how was the recording yesterday?" My heart filled with pride and excitement. "Incredible. Jack said we finished 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The album is officially completed." "From the Storm," James said the album title with reverence. "I can't wait for the whole world to hear it." The album had become more than just a collection of songs. It was the story of our journey. From the title track about finding hope after life storms, to Seeds in Dark Soil about Tyler and James planting tomatoes, each song carried pieces of our experience. "And is the release still set for next week?" Emma asked, joining our conversation. "Next week," I confirmed, with the launch show at the Ryman Auditorium on Friday. The Ryman, the mother church of country music. When Jack told me he had secured the venue for my launch show, I cried for 20 minutes. It was more than a dream come true. It was a validation of everything I had fought for. "Speaking of shows," James said, his voice taking on a slightly nervous tone, "there's something Emma and I want to ask you." Emma smiled, clearly in on whatever the plan was. "Dad, do you want to do this outside? I thought we were going to wait until after dinner." "I can't wait anymore," James admitted, suddenly seeming like a nervous young man. My stomach flipped. "James, what's going on?" He took a deep breath and, to my complete shock, knelt in the middle of our tomato garden. "Sarah Collins," he began, pulling a small velvet box from his wrapped box. "6 months ago you saved my life in a storm, not just by giving me shelter, but by teaching me what it truly means to live, to love, and to be part of a family." Tears started to burn in my eyes. Tyler had stopped playing and was watching everything with wide eyes. "You taught me that it's never too late to be the man I should have always been, that it's never too late to choose love over fear, family over work, hope over regret." He opened the box, revealing a simple yet beautiful ring. A solitary stone surrounded by small diamonds that sparkled in the afternoon light. "Sarah, will you marry me? Will you and Tyler let me officially be part of this amazing family we've built together?" The world stopped for a moment. I looked at James, kneeling among the plants he had helped cultivate, with eyes full of hope and love. I looked at Emma, who was smiling with tears in her own eyes. I looked at Tyler, who was clapping excitedly. Does this mean James is going to be my real daddy? Tyler asked with all the innocence in the world. The question broke any last resistance I might have had. Yes, my love, I said, looking directly at James. Yes, I will marry you. James got up and kissed me as Tyler screamed in joy and Emma clapped. The ring fit perfectly on my finger, as if it had been made to be there. There's one more thing, Emma said when we finally pulled away. Actually, there are several things. She took her own box and opened it, revealing a homemade photo album. I've spent the last few weeks putting this together. It's pictures of Mom, of Dad when he was young, of our family before everything went wrong. Her voice trembled slightly. I want Tyler to meet his grandmother Margaret, even though she can't be here with us. We flipped through the album together, and it was like receiving an entire family back. Pictures of Margaret gardening, of a young James playing guitar, of Emma as a baby being held by her loving parents. She would have loved you both, Emma said, looking at Tyler and me. Mom always said that family isn't about blood. It's about who we choose to love and care for. And there's more, James added, looking slightly embarrassed. Emma had an idea for our wedding. I want to play at your wedding, Emma said quickly. Dad told me you don't have family to support you and I would love to be your maid of honor. If you want, of course. The offer hit me like lightning. In all my dreams about marriage, in the few moments I allowed myself to have those dreams, I never imagined having someone by my side who chose me as family. Emma, I whispered, my voice choked. I would be honored. And can I be the ring bearer? Tyler asked, not wanting to be left out. Of course, little man, James said, picking Tyler up. Actually, I was hoping you would ask me a very important question. Tyler looked confused. What question? James became serious, as if he were about to conduct a very important business meeting. Tyler Collins, would you honor me by letting me be your official adoptive father? So that we can truly be a family forever. Tyler's face lit up like the rising sun. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. He jumped into James's arms, and I had to lean on Emma to keep from falling from so much emotion. Then it's decided, Emma said, wiping her own tears. We've got a wedding to plan, an adoption to arrange, and an album to release. It's going to be a very busy fall. That night, after Emma went to the hotel where she was staying, though she was increasingly spending the night in the guest room that James had specially converted for her visits, the three of us sat on the back porch, watching the stars appear in the Nashville sky. Tyler was nestled between James and me on the swing we had installed the previous month, almost asleep after all the excitement of the day. You know what impresses me most about all this? James said quietly, so as not to wake Tyler. What? A year ago, if someone had told me I would be here, engaged to the most amazing woman in the world, with a son who calls me dad, and my own daughter back in my life. He shook his head. I would have laughed at the impossibility of it all. And now I believe in miracles. Or at least, I believe that when you're willing to change, life conspires to give you the right opportunities. I looked at our garden, where the plants were starting to yellow with the arrival of autumn. In a few weeks, it would be time to prepare the soil for winter, to plant new seeds that would sleep until spring. James, I said, a sudden thought occurring to me, how about we get married here? In the garden. Here. Where it all began. Where Tyler planted his first seeds. Where you taught me that it's possible to cultivate beautiful things even after the storms. James smiled, and I could see that the idea had deeply touched him. Sarah Collins, you really want to marry me in the middle of a tomato garden? James Mitchell, I can't think of a better place. After all, it's where our family really grew. 3 weeks later, on a golden October morning, I married James Robert Mitchell in a garden decorated with wildflowers and surrounded by friends from the music industry, some neighbors who had become dear, and even my own mother, who had unexpectedly arrived 2 days earlier after Emma called her and explained everything. Maybe I judged some things wrong, my mom had admitted hesitantly when she arrived. Maybe it's time for me to learn about second chances too. Tyler carried our rings on a small pillow that Emma had embroidered with the words "From the Storm," the name of my album, which had also become our family's motto. When Jack Sullivan introduced me at the Ryman the following week as Sarah Mitchell, my new name after the wedding, and I dedicated my first song to the man who taught me that after every storm, the rainbow always comes. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. From the Storm debuted at #1 on the country charts, and 3 of its songs became hits on the radio. But the success I was most proud of was what happened at home every night: Tyler calling James Dad. As if it had always been that way, Emma coming over for dinner at least twice a week, and how our neighbors had started referring to us as the Mitchell family. That Christmas, while we watched Tyler and Emma put together a gingerbread house in the kitchen, with James supervising and offering unnecessary architectural advice, I received a call from my record label. "Sarah, it's Jack. I've got an interesting proposal for you. How about a national tour next summer? 20 cities, starting in Los Angeles and ending here in Nashville." I looked through the kitchen window at our garden, where we were already planning what to plant in the spring. A national tour was every country artist's dream. "Can I bring my family?" I asked. Jack laughed. "Honey, after what I saw at your launch show, I recommend that you bring your family. Tyler stole the show when he got on stage to sing with you." "Then yes," I said, watching my husband and children laugh at something Emma had said. "I accept." Because now I knew the truth that Margaret had tried to teach James all those years ago, the truth my own journey had shown me. Success is not about how much money you make or how many applause you get. It's about the people waiting for you when you walk off stage. It's about creating a life that honors both your dreams and your heart. And as I watched my family, chosen, cultivated, grown from the fertile soil of second chances and true love, I knew I had finally learned the difference between surviving and truly living. Out there in the dark earth of our garden, little seeds were peacefully sleeping, waiting for spring to awaken and grow. Like all of us, they knew that after the coldest winter, the season of rebirth always comes. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we find out that the storm we thought would destroy everything was actually what brought us exactly where we needed to be.